So this is my last video of 2020. It has been a rough year, and that has definitely affected this here YouTube channel. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but not shoehorn it into what I have to say about this. And since I don't have a second channel to throw that onto, I've actually put something up on my Patreon that is freely available for anyone so inclined. Linked below. It has now been more than a decade since I graduated from high school. In fact, if it were not for the whole of Western civilization falling apart, I think I would have had my 10-year reunion about a month ago. And that was the one I was interested in attending. They had one at 5 years, of course, but why? I come from a town where basically everyone goes to college, so 5 years later, folks are barely on the other side of that, and that's not far enough along in life to really be interesting, myself included. Also, I was about to go through a very ugly breakup, so I wouldn't have been able to just stroll up and brag about how my life was going, and that kind of seemed like the point, right? I mean, I don't know how much bragging I would have done at 10 years, but at least I'm not about to go through that whole thing again. Right, hon? She said yes. Point is, it's been a while since I've sat at a desk and stared slack-jawed at someone droning on about some dumb thing or another. But I've always been fascinated by depictions of classrooms in TV shows and movies, especially those from other periods or places. Because as much as I actively hate literally all children, I also think it's important that those same awful small things are properly prepared to be actual people later in life. And sure, what I'm seeing isn't perfectly accurate or whatever, but it still says something interesting about that culture in that moment. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week Air Review. You can call me Never Gonna Be a Teacher. And today, I am finishing my discussion of Steve McQueen's Small Axe series by talking about its final entry, Education. While two of the other Small Axe films begin with their protagonists as schoolboys, Education is the only one to keep him there. Kingsley Smith is just 12 years old, and he remains that way throughout. But like everyone else, he comes from a West Indian background with an older sister who seems pretty academically skilled, a father with no real education who believes that there's nothing wrong with having Kingsley just learn a trade and doing that work. And he is fundamentally correct. Of course, there is nothing wrong with that. But ideally, it's because someone would actually like to be part of the trade and not because they have no other options, yet existing in capitalism requires them to do something. And a mother working multiple jobs who cares very deeply about her kids being educated, but is far too busy and stressed out to really deal with what's going on. So when she's called in from work to go talk to Kingsley's principal or whatever Brits call that position, she's frustrated more about the fact that her time has been wasted than the fact that Kingsley has effectively been kicked out of the school and is now being sent to one for kids with special needs. And this whole thing is a little odd. Of course, we understand that there is a racial component to this transfer. We see Kingsley's white friend do exactly the same tomfoolery, but with no consequences. However, Kingsley is also unable to read, which isn't true about his white friend, and that's kinda a big deal. And on that level, it wasn't actually clear to me that the school was entirely wrong to say he needed to be in a place where the educators could be more directly focused on his needs. He's clearly intelligent and intellectually curious, interested in science and with a desire to be an astronaut, but not being able to read as a 12-year-old is gonna be pretty debilitating in a regular school. But even if it's true that Kingsley needs some additional support, he won't be getting it from this school he's transferred to. And we understand that just about immediately and see the deeper racial component in the process. Because Kingsley comes in at the same time as two others, a black girl named Nina and a white girl named, I don't know. But while Nina is presumably in a boat similar to Kingsley's, the white girl seems to communicate exclusively through animal noises. And that is a whole other level of required care. And we find that's generally the case. The white kids sent to the school have far more complex needs than the black ones. But unfortunately, they are all equally ignored. Because it turns out that this school, one for the educationally subnormal, as the British government so cutely called them, has teachers who could not possibly care less about their students, let alone those students' academics. They'd much rather, say, sit on their desk with an acoustic guitar and sing the entirety of House of the Rising Sun by the Animals to a bunch of actual children, which is frankly excruciating to watch, but I see why McQueen felt it was necessary to have the whole thing in there, especially since it was depicting an event that literally happened to him when he was a kid. And what the fuck, dude? I mean, my 7th grade science teacher once took a class to sing songs for us instead of teaching about whatever, but it was the last day before a week's vacation, and one of my classmates had brought in the guitar and whatever. It was fun and not representative of his general attitude and teaching style, although the reason I have thought about this at least once every couple of months for the past 17 years is the fact that when he started singing Brown Eyed Girl, he winked at one of these actual children who was a brown-eyed girl. And look, she also had brown in her name, so that's funny, I guess, and he probably didn't mean anything by it, but fuck, that was just really weird. Then again, I don't know why I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, considering how much he loved reminding us that evolution is only a theory, to which I once reminded him that gravity is also a theory, which is only kind of correct, but tells you a lot about what sort of kid I was. And while we're on the subject of science, did you know that Steve McQueen thinks of the films in the Small Axe series as something akin to science fiction? Seriously, in an interview with Rolling Stone, he makes that claim specifically because he wants us to understand that these films are more about the future than the past. And so it makes sense that we end on Education, a film about building up the next generation. Ever since my review of Lovers Rock, I have been talking about small axis sequencing, and I am sure if you're one of the handful of folks to go through this whole series with me, you're so over this. But now that we have the whole picture, I can speak factually about something I said merely with confidence in my review of Red, White, and Blue. Steve McQueen wanted to leave us on a hopeful note. I was talking about this with my friend Hubert the other day, who saw the first 3 entries when they premiered at the New York Film Festival, and he is frankly much better at this than I am, and you should go read his reviews of the series over on Flixus.com. But apparently he was told during the New York Film Festival that Red, White, and Blue was intended to be the series ender. And I don't know why the festival would lie like that, but it's interesting to think about how much different I would feel about Small Axe if it ended there instead of here. Because Red, White, and Blue is the only film in the series that leaves as a full-on downer. And to have a series of films that are variably hopeful then get cut off at the knees by that would totally change the way everything before it played out. That hope would seem a lot less hopeful, and it would make the exercise feel a lot more futile. And from conversations with Hubert and others, even within the comments on these videos, I understand that I see that ending as bleaker than most, but even if it is not actively hopeless, it is at least built on exhaustion and figurative, if not literal, resignation. And Education isn't that at all. Education is about the way that the West Indian community rises up together against the placement of their children into these educationally subnormal schools. And when the government refuses to help, how they help themselves and create a community learning space for their children, not only to better understand what they would have been taught in schools, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to understand what they were not. And that is incredibly critical, not just for Kingsley and for that community, but for every person who isn't in that community. Because when I was being taught almost exclusively European history in school, I never really thought about it. In my off time, I would sometimes read a bit about Japanese history because I was into anime and whatever, but I genuinely didn't understand how Eurocentric all of this was until April 2017. I was in a museum in Seoul, looking at images of the start of human civilization, something I have seen dozens of times in museums in America and Europe. There was the evolution from ape to man. But this time, the ape wasn't transforming into someone who looked exactly like me. And that was truly mind-boggling because I'd never seen that before. I don't know if I literally slapped my forehead, but I definitely metaphorically did because it became so clear in that moment that the version of history I had learned was fundamentally different than what others had learned. It wasn't just that I didn't learn Korean history in school, it was that the way I was taught the story of civilization meant that learning their history seemed irrelevant. And that expanded way out almost instantly because the truth is that the ape always should not have been the European guy, just as it shouldn't have been the Korean guy. It should have become an African man. And it's so obvious in hindsight, right? And yet, I don't know if Education, the film, will give anyone the moment of clarity I had in that Korean museum. But Education, the concept, can and must, because understanding that is how we can begin to move forward, how we start to do the important work that Small Axe has been showing us across its 5 entries. And by ending at the beginning, Steve McQueen reminds us what we have done, makes clear how far we have left to go, and then graciously offers a way for us to get there. 8.5 out of 10. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you particularly to my patrons, my mom, Hamry and Marco, Kat Saracata, Benjamin Schiff, Anthony Cole, Magnolia Denton, Elliot Fowler, Greg Lucina, Werner van Alphen, Liam Knipe, Kojo, Phil Bates, Willow, and I Am the Sword. If you like this video, that's great. If not, don't care. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next year. Happy New Year, folks. Good golly, good riddance 2020.